Good morning, gentlemen. It is Monday morning, which means it's a Man Talk Monday on the Gird Up Podcast. My name is Charlie Ungemak. I am the founder, host, and curator of this awesome podcast. I hope that it's serving to make you a better man, serving to help you along your road toward Christian manhood. Man, it's a journey we are on together, and I'm humbled that you have chosen to be with us. This week, we are doing the last of Mansfield's manly characteristics and traits. So Stephen Mansfield wrote a book called Mansfield's Book of Manly Men, which sounds silly, but it's an excellent book. And he talks about four manly maxims, which are, I can't remember what they are, but he talks about four manly maxims for things that manly men do, and then he talks about 18 characteristics of masculinity. And today is our last one. We're going to talk about sacrifice today. Mr. Nick Cresson is our guest co-host today. Again, sorry about the quality of the audio. I did the best I could with the resources that we have at the moment. If you would like to support this podcast, we can get better resources, and some of these phone call interviews can be a little bit better. But if you are not following us on social media, make sure you're doing that. If you find us on Facebook or Instagram, we're at Gird Up. If you want to, you can join the Gird Up community on Facebook. There's not always a lot going on over there, but there are some great opportunities to interact with other men. We are the most active on Instagram, although I try not to be on social media too much just for my own sake. But you can always reach us. You can always get a hold of us. We're checking them all the time. If you'd like to be a part of what we're doing here, you can certainly do that. Just message us and let us know how. If you'd like to sponsor this podcast, you can do that via Patreon. All that information is at the end of the podcast. Or you can choose to advertise on the show. You'll hear an advertisement today before we launch into the episode. But most of all, gentlemen, I thank you for being a part of this growing revival in Christian manhood and in masculinity, one that's vital, one that's absolutely necessary, and one that continues to grow. So God bless you. I hope that we continue to build you up today. And after a word from our sponsor, we'll get into our episode today, Man Talk Monday, talking about sacrifice.
Today's podcast is sponsored by the Christ for Disciplers podcast. I'm Pastor Paul Steinberg, son of Ken and father of 5 sons. Each weekday on the Christ for Disciplers podcast, I apply God's Word to raising the next generation. Take 10 minutes each weekday to listen to the Christ for Disciplers podcast and get direction and gospel power to disciple the youngest generation. Subscribe to the Christ for Disciplers podcast by going to ChristForDisciplers.com or searching on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, and whatever else. ChristForDisciplers.com.
You are listening to the Gird Up Podcast. To gird up is an ancient way of preparing oneself for hard work or a battle ahead. Our work is to reclaim masculinity in the modern world and to live out our calling as men of God. Here you will find a community of believers working hard to become the men that God created us to be. Now it's time to roll up your sleeves and let's get to work. All right, once again, we've got special guest host today, Mr. Nick Cresson, the great Vanilla Gorilla, dad
What's going on, everybody?
Yeah.
Hey.
Awesome.
Thanks for having me.
So, our word today is sacrifice. Sacrifice. And sacrifice is defined as an act of giving up something valued for the sake of something else regarded as important or worthy. We must all be prepared to make sacrifices. It also could be a move intended to allow the opponent to win a pawn or piece for strategic or tactical reasons, like obviously in a game or something like that.
Sure. Like you give up the layup to stop the team from scoring a 3-pointer.
Yeah. Or vice versa. Draymond Green passes up an open layup to dish the ball to Steph.
Sure. Absolutely.
Yeah. Both are sacrifices. Both have different risks and different rewards, but both are sacrifices.
Absolutely. Okay.
Yeah.
You got a question to guide us along, or are we just diving in on this?
Man, we're just diving in. So, sacrifice is in order to sacrifice something, you have to place value on something, right? And so whether the sacrifice turns out to be a good idea or not, because people make you think about it, like druggies are making a sacrifice. They're choosing not to do other things in order to, be an addict, right? To get the fix.
Right.
And then on the flip side, a priest or a pastor, is making great sacrifices in order to be, in better service to God. So sacrifices can go both ways.
Yep.
So it's choosing. It's first it's setting value. So I guess the first question is, how do we determine what's more valuable than other things?
Right, and right away talking about value, I think of the rocks in the glass. You heard this analogy before?
Go ahead and dish it, man.
Okay, so you have this jar, this cup, and you've got big rocks, you got small rocks, and you got your sand. And I think before you can decide what things you're going to sacrifice for in your life, you've really got to pick out the 4 most important things. Okay, so maybe for the average Joe dude, it's his marriage, his children, his job, and his health. Okay, so you put those 4 things, you put those 4 big rocks in the container. You know what I mean? And then the smaller rocks would be, okay, hanging out with the guys. That's gonna fit. Those things are gonna fit if or taking care of the yard or whatever it is. Those things are gonna still be able to fit around those big rocks, and as long as those big rocks are in there first, and then whatever else comes up, whether it's playing in the rec league or reading a book or you know what I mean, like any of those tiny things that are really less important when a guy sets up his values. It's easy to fit the smaller things in when you are focusing first on those main parts in your life. But if you put the rec league and watching football and reading in or all the other little things that are less important in the long scheme of things, that are less important to your life, if those all go in the glass first, then it's going to fill up, and you aren't going to have enough room for those big rocks, those big core values that you have.
Yeah.
So I feel like before you can sacrifice for what's important, you've got to really figure out as a man what is important to you.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Oh, and I think it's something that's incredibly difficult too. So even if you do know that, and you thought about it and you said, yeah, these are the things that are important to me, it's incredibly difficult to actually discipline yourself to do those things, right?
Yeah.
Especially, I think, as young men who are stepping up and taking on more responsibilities and moving into new phases of life all the time. We have to be constantly kind of reassessing and reevaluating, what we do find valuable. So this time of year in the summer, we're both teachers, and I know for both of us, the value of the workouts skyrockets during the summer, right?
Yeah,
I spend way more time in the gym. I spend way more money on food because I'm spending more time in the gym. I'm spending more and more time thinking about it and putting more just generally more effort into it. But when it gets to be football season, as soon as it hits August 1st and football season's in, it's going to take a step down. And then once the school year starts, so I got football, school, then my workout, right?
Right.
And if you can start throwing in the other things in there too.
Yep.
And whichever ones are the most valuable, that's what you need to put on top. And so we a lot of times in moments of weakness will fall out of what we know ought to be right. So instead of going home to my wife and obviously I don't have a wife, but if I did, instead of a guy going home to his wife and spending quality time with her and having a difficult conversation potentially, he goes to the bar and he has a beer and then another beer and another beer, and he doesn't get drunk. He isn't. It's discretionary income. He's not throwing money away. Technically he's not financially or physically hurting anyone.
Yeah.
But he's stepping out of his role as the man of the house. He's stepping out of his role as a husband. He's not showing up. He's not present like we talked about last week.
Yep.
He's not doing what he needs to do because he's not valuing her the way he needs to value her, and he's not making the sacrifices he needs to make in order to be the man he ought to be.
Yeah, absolutely. Can I give the guys a real life Nick situation for this?
Yeah, dude.
Okay, so a year ago, right when school got out, a little bit before school got out, a little bit into the fourth quarter of the 2018 school year, I got back into the swing of weightlifting pretty consistently, 4 days a week. I went 4 days a week all through the summer, lifted in the morning while my wife was working. She worked at an early childhood center, and so I mean there were no days off for her call, you know, and so she was at work, and I was getting my workout in 4 days a week, 2 hours a day, like, and by the end of the summer I was, and then I mean by like October I was as strong as I had ever been in my life, you know, like stronger than I was playing football in college, anything, you know, and I was competing in weightlifting, and I did 2 competitions and was pretty successful, and I had this goal in my mind of like, hey, things are going well. If I keep this up, I could make the national weightlifting competition. I could qualify and I could go for it. And I had this goal in my mind, you know? And then summer ended, school year popped up, and then I was like, okay, 4 days a week, that is not going to be a thing. 8 hours a week, that is going to be impossible. Coaching football, teaching, being home with my wife, it's not happening. So then it was 6 hours a week. All right. I was like, you know what? And maybe one of those days I could get it all in an hour and a half. And then I was able to pretty much do that through the football season and coaching, and kind of stay on top of my responsibilities. And because I had this goal in my mind, you know, I had this big rock that I was putting in my cup that, you know what, maybe shouldn't have been there at that point, but it was, and that's where I was putting a lot of my focus. And it was pretty selfish. I'll hindsight 2020, like looking back at things, like I was not looking at what was important. But then basketball takes up a ton of time. Anybody who coaches basketball from the end of October through February, like that's on top of your job, that's 15 plus hours a week, you know, with
Right.
practices and games and everything else. It's hectic, dude. And so that put a wrench in my training again. And now and then after that, it was third quarter, fourth quarter of the school year, which, you know, just gets crazy. And I had to really have a tough conversation with my wife and be like, hey, like, exercising is important, but maybe this goal that I had, and I feel like I could have achieved to make this national and qualify for this national competition, it couldn't be a big rock, you know?
Right.
And so in order to fulfill my number one call that I have as a husband, I had to sacrifice that goal that I had of qualifying for this national competition. I had to really, really take a step back and be like, whoa, like I was not prioritizing my time. I wasn't being present with my wife, or maybe I was skipping out on things I could have been doing with my call to make my teaching or my coaching or my athletic directing better. And it was just like, man, I really dropped the ball on that one. And I had to sacrifice something that I felt really strongly about, and that could have been a really cool thing for my life and my story, but it's just like, it's got to go on the back burner right now because I've got other important things to take care of. First and foremost, my wife.
Yeah, absolutely. I think my favorite example right now in the sports world is strongman Eddie Hall. Are you familiar
Yep.
with his story at all?
A little bit.
He's shorter than most strongmen are, and so just a quick background: he won the World's Strongest Man last year, and he was the strongest man in the world, undisputed. and but he's shorter than most strong men are, and so he had to put on a lot more weight in unhealthy ways, kind of, in order to get to that to be that strong. And so he had a deal with his wife where he said, I love this sport, and I personally am willing to pursue this if it, even if it killed me. But he made a deal with his wife. When I win, then I'll quit. And he kept his word. So now Eddie Hall, he was like 400 something pounds, and like obviously the strongest man in the world. And he stepped back, and I was doing like bodybuilding and stuff like that. But like he had to find different work because he's not winning prize money anymore. He doesn't get the same sponsorships and stuff like that. So like they had to completely change their lifestyle and change the way they were doing things, because he quit. But he quit in order to be a better husband and a better father and to be healthier so that he could be there for his children as they get older. It's sacrifice, right? It's taking something that is valuable and it is important and setting it aside or putting it on the back burner for something that's more valuable or more important.
Right.
Awesome.
Or you think about, just any sacrificing that you can do. I mean, for us Christian men, it's first and foremost, on top of taking care of our family and our families and the people that are important to us, we're not going to be able to do that to 100% of our ability unless we're putting our relationship with God first,
Right. Yeah, and making the
so,
sacrifices to make that happen.
Yeah, you've got to sacrifice time, because if you're not putting in, I mean, if you're putting in less than an hour a week, I feel like with personal Bible study, and maybe that's a little high. I don't know. It's going to depend on.
You got 7 days a week. Like if you got 7 days a week, that's less than 10 minutes a day.
Sure. Yeah. So I don't think that's not out of the question. But I mean, I'd say if you're not doing that, man, you need to look at those rocks in your jar and see what you can move around and how you can prioritize and what you might have to push out of the way in order to really be the best man that you can be, guided by the promises and the glory that God promises to give to us as we study His Word.
That's right. That's one way to prove you got some real big stones. Yeah.
All right, I'm done.
All right, fellas, you guys have a great week. We love you. Gird up. Have an awesome week this week. Spend time with your Heavenly Father. Thanks, Nick.
Hey, thank you, Charlie.
You are listening to the Gird Up Podcast. To gird up is an ancient way of preparing oneself for hard work or a battle ahead. Our work is to reclaim masculinity in the modern world and to live out our calling as men of God. Here you will find a community of believers working hard to become the men that God created us to be. Now it's time to roll up your sleeves and let's get to work.